We are just a few weeks away from championship weekend in college football. The stakes are soaring. We got Bill Bender here from the Sporting News to help us break it down. We always appreciate the conversation with Bill. How you doing today, sir?
Hey, I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm doing great. Appreciate you being here. Always look forward to this. So again, we had another unveiling on Tuesday night from the College Football Playoff Committee. Is there anything that surprised you? Everything seemed to be pretty in line with the weekend's results. And of course, Indiana sitting in that 5 position seems to be the one that everyone's looking at thinking, okay, based on what happens this weekend, what's the move going to be?
Yeah, and that's a polarizing topic, obviously. I mean, I see both sides as usual. If the gap between Indiana and Tennessee, is it based on record? Is it based on who they've played? There's no question Tennessee has a better strength of schedule. I mean, they're the only team among all those SEC 2-loss teams that played Georgia and Alabama. And I get the whole notion that we can't play hypotheticals. But at the same time, Indiana's a good team. Doesn't take away from what they're doing. And I kind of hate the fact that this game, instead of being like a huge Big Ten showdown, it's become a referendum of how many is Indiana going to lose by. And that's not a given. You know, they still got to go out. Both sides got to go out and play that game on Saturday.
They really do. And certainly Ohio State has shown vulnerability in one game, and Indiana has been consistent throughout. Otherwise, there is that Michigan second half in which they showed themselves to be vulnerable. And a lot of people are pointing to that as a precursor for an Ohio State blowout win. So what do you think the committee will do, and what do you think you would do with Indiana based on various scenarios? Obviously, we're looking at a loss. A win takes care of itself. But in a sense, at number 5, I hear people talking about how far they're going to fall if they lose a decent game. Let's say they play within a couple scores. It's a 35-24 game. They play a relatively strong game, but Ohio State's clearly the better team. And it's a competitive game that they should just plummet from there, I guess. But I don't see it that way. I see, in a sense, this game can legitimize their season, not just in a win, but in a loss if they stay competitive against number 2.
Right. You know, I made the comparison to the Iowa-Ohio State game that I went to. I think it was on October 5th. The Hawkeyes competed for a half. They lost 35-7, but I didn't walk away thinking, Ohio State played a complete game, but Iowa played well too. And the score mattered less to me than you actually watched the game. So I think if Indiana played that type of game where it was tight at half and they lost by 17 or 14, that they're fine. I think. I mean, I don't know. So it depends on how much the committee goes after their strength of schedule ranking. So the doomsday scenario for Indiana would be, and I've made this reference a few times, is if Ohio State does to them what they did to Michigan State a few years ago, then yeah, we're going to have a problem, and Tennessee is going to come in. The reason why I don't think that's going to happen is Ohio State doesn't have that kind of explosive passing attack. At least they're not playing that way. CJ, I remember that looked like a 7-on-7 tournament, the way that they played the Spartans that day. And Will Howard doesn't throw down the field that much. I think Ohio State's still going to be feeling out the offensive line now with the Seth McLaughlin news. That's horrible news. I hate it for him. So I think it'll probably play out to about what the spread says. And, you know, for Ohio State, the most important thing, they can't get distracted here either. They got to go out and win the football game.
Yeah, if they lose the second game, trouble, because their resume is not going to match up against that pack of SEC teams that seem to be kind of moving with each other in those rankings. It seems to be like if the committee is going to make a decision on anybody else, to place them either above all of them or below all of them, and then they wedged Miami in the middle of them, which seemed a bit difficult because as I was going through those 4 SEC teams, I was trying to treat them separately, but they're so interconnected, it's kind of difficult to do, to separate them and wedge anybody else in there. But the committee chose to do that with Miami for some reason.
Right. And you know, I was curious last night how they were going to stack up the bunch, so to speak. Now, I thought Alabama would be ranked ahead of the Georgia, and Ole Miss would be ranked ahead of Georgia, but I was curious if they were going to honor Georgia's strength of schedule. They're the one I don't have a problem with at all. I know they've lost 2 games. I understand that. But when you've played on the road at Ole Miss, and you've played Tennessee, and you've played Alabama, and you played on the road at Texas and won, and then you played Clemson in non-conference play, I don't think too many people can pick at Georgia's schedule, strength of schedule. They've played enough tough games. They did have they won at Kentucky, and I know that, but at the time we were thinking, oh, that's a horrible win. They barely got by, but I think Georgia's done a good job of negotiating their schedule. I think if we've learned anything, Georgia and Alabama will both be in the playoff. Ole Miss and Tennessee, it could become an argument. Ole Miss has to take care of business against Florida this weekend, by the way. I don't love that game for them. I think Florida could come out and play. And then you go from there. And then the other end, Mark, I was talking to somebody about this yesterday. Somebody's going to go to the SEC championship and lose and probably get a third loss. Are we going to put that team in over somebody? And I think you should. I think you probably should in that case. But I was reminded that Georgia had one bad half of football last year, and they were left out of the 14 playoff.
And that's the quandary about these championship games, because if you take the last 10 years, certainly during the 14 playoff and before that, use the AP rankings, I know I ran through all the seasons going into this 12-teamer to see how conference championship game losses have impacted teams. And there was a slew of teams that were safely inside the 12-team format and then lost a conference championship game, and that moved them out of the rankings. Now, will this committee treat those teams differently, even though it should be the same process because it means a playoff spot? And a lot of people do believe that the conference championship game for the loser should be just kind of discarded. To me, it's not. I think that there should be a nuanced look at it, not to penalize them to the fullest degree for not looking good in a conference championship game, but it's still a data point. It's still a competitive football game against a quality opponent to be evaluated.
I agree. And I think you look at that and you have to take into account, okay, what's the score? So I'm envisioning a scenario. Let's say Alabama and Texas go to the SEC championship game, and Texas or Alabama. Well, Texas would be in good shape then because they would only have one loss. But if Alabama were to lose by like 28, you would have to take that into account with Ole Miss and Tennessee trying to squeeze in. I mean, really, what the college football playoff picture boils down to me is that, and it's going to matter with the SEC and the Big Ten. I look at those conference championship games. I said the teams that make those should be in theory. They should get a quasi-automatic berth, I guess, because to me, those tournaments feel a little bit like the Big Ten and ACC basketball tournaments, where you're like, Purdue, if they get to the semifinals, they're not, we're not bouncing teams out. It's almost like the Big Ten basketball tournament is more designed for the bubble team to make a run and get in. So we accept that for what it is. Like if Michigan State's a 1 seed and loses, nobody says, oh, the Spartans are out. So we do have to determine what the value of these games are. I've stood by, and I think I've said on this show that I think they're obsolete in this format. I really do, because you didn't account for an 18-team conference. You don't have divisions. The 2 teams that are in, and yeah, they want to play. Yeah, these coaches are going to say publicly they want to play for a championship, and that trophy means a lot. But I grew up in a Big Ten where they decided that in the regular season, and there were 3-way ties. I mean, I remember, I think my freshman year of college, I think like 3 or 4 teams tied for the Big Ten championship, technically, and they gave it to one of them. And we were fine with that then. I don't, in this setup, I think the most important game you're going to want to win is the playoff game, not the Big Ten championship.
Yeah, and then there's still this discussion about whether it serves teams well to go to a conference championship game and risk. It's a risk reward. If you win it, great, you got the bye. If you lost it, well, you played an extra game, possibly got even more beat up, and now you're going to have to go possibly on the road or even host a on-campus game for a playoff game. Bill, you mentioned this Ole Miss game at Florida. Yeah, that pops up as being one of these late season games that we see every year where somebody jumps up and unexpectedly pulls off an upset that shakes things up. And that appears to be one. And I don't know that a lot of people are looking at Penn State traveling to Minnesota as a possible trap there as well.
Hey, both of those games. I got a third one for you too. Auburn and Texas A&M. Auburn at Auburn, and A&M going there and
At night,
and it could get rowdy. And Auburn, they are the king of weird things happening these last 2 weeks of the season, even if they're not in the race, as they get ready for the Iron Bowl. So that's another one. Ole Miss going in the swamp looked like the swamp Saturday when Florida played LSU. It looked like a tough place to play. Billy Napier has some confidence around DJ Lagway. They're going to go to a bowl game, which a lot of people didn't think was possible. So kudos to Billy Napier for flipping that season a little bit. And then I didn't check the weather on Penn State, Minnesota. Can the weather be a factor in that game? Can Minnesota make it ugly? And, they've won. I think they've split the last 6 meetings with Penn State, and they've won a couple up there. I remember the one with, what was that quarterback's name? He was there forever. A couple years ago.
Tanner Morgan.
That's it. Morgan and the receivers, and they got it going up there. So that is another one that could impact this picture, because here's the thing. If Penn State loses, they'll really get picked on by the SEC teams looking to get in, because they don't really have their best victory right now is West Virginia looked good in week 1.
Illinois.
Is it Illinois? Illinois is probably their best victory at home in a whiteout. So, or not a whiteout. They did that later. But yeah, USC is probably their best victory in terms of what we saw visibility wise. So they would get picked at if they lost that game, no question.
Got Bill Bender here from the Sporting News. Check out Bill's work. He's really been dissecting the landscape of these conferences and the scenarios and situations involved in leading to these tiebreakers and everything that fascinates me, and one of the reasons why I enjoyed the last weekend of the NFL as well. But there we know if A happens, B happens, then it results with C. Here it's just a guessing game that these are the things that are going to happen. But what is the committee going to do to respond to those things? Nobody forecasted BYU and Arizona State to be an enormous game, which is pretty fun.
No, the Big 12 has 2 of them this weekend. I just went through our sports data grid this morning. We partnered with Pool Genius, and you go through this grid and it tells you the percent chance each game's going to win. And the 3 closest games of the week are Illinois, Rutgers among ranked teams. Illinois goes to Rutgers. That's a coin flip game, but that doesn't impact the playoff picture like Arizona State and BYU. Virtual coin flip game in Tempe. The Cougars coming off a loss. The Cougars have been a fun team to watch this year. I'm one of those guys that's like, I know what they are and I know what the Big 12 is. So it's kind of fun to watch games where it's the talent gap isn't going to determine things. You have to execute, and BYU had some bad breaks against Kansas. And now they're facing an Arizona State team that just ripped Kansas State on the road and is hot at the right time with Sam Leavitt, the Michigan State transfer. So I like the Sun Devils in that game. And then, of course, you got Colorado and Kansas at Arrowhead Stadium. And Colorado, their last 4 games, they have beat opponents by 18 points per game. They're playing great. Like, you have to – that's when I watched them. Like, there was no doubt early, even after that early interception, where I'm like, they're just better than Utah on offense especially. So, but Kansas has picked off Iowa State and BYU in back-to-back weeks. So we're going to learn a lot about this very entertaining Big 12 picture this weekend.
There's a crazy scenario out there, which I'm sure you've run across, with Army running the table, pulling off the upset against Notre Dame, winning the American, and then Boise State continuing to roll there and holding off whatever worst case scenario for the Big 12 in regards to having the lowest ranked possible team that could be in the Big 12 championship game, whether that's Arizona State, because they sit at 21 right now, although they're going to get some boost from a BYU win, but that the Big 12 goes to the complete back of the line of these conference championships to a 6th spot.
Yeah, and I didn't really put much thought. I think you put that in my ear last week, and I didn't really put much thought to it because I just assumed that the power conferences would get the preferential treatment. And you almost go autopilot when you think, and then you start to think, well, Boise State might have 1 loss. or, the American Athletic Conference champ. Maybe they deserve to get that bye. I still think they'll give preferential treatment to the larger conferences in that event. But, especially if Colorado gets a bye or can get a bye week, and they can, get Colorado to the quarterfinals, right? But is there a chance that a group of 5 team could get a top 4 seed? I think so. I mean, we'll be watching Army Navy really closely. I'm wondering, the spread tells me that there isn't much thought to Army winning that game on Saturday. But if they do, imagine it knocks Notre Dame out. It makes this Tulane game huge. I actually think Tulane's the best team of the 3. I heard Danny Cannell say that the other night, and he was getting roasted for it, but I kind of agree with him that if you were doing a group of 5 Final Four, I might pick Tulane to win it.
They've been the best team over the last few years.
Right.
Obviously, they've switched coaches, but he's been able to maintain. Obviously, Jen Sumrall has done a great job. Bill, we are less than 2 weeks away from an extremely busy weekend because it's the culmination of the regular season. And then if you factor in, obviously, going into championship week, National Signing Day has been moved up to December 4th. That's crazy. It's right in the middle of all that. And then there's also Black Sunday that we always see about 8 to 12 coaches get the axe. Who in particular do you think is in trouble?
I don't think there are too many, honestly. You've had 11 coaching changes, the schools that get ahead of this, and they've all been in the group of 5. I think that's another trend we're going to be writing about in a couple weeks because, the Billy Napier thing kind of set a trend here that we may not see a lot of power conference schools fire their coaches because of NIL and the money and the buyouts and those kind of things. Billy Napier, I think Florida actually made the right call. I'm looking at Mike Norvell. I just don't know. I don't think they're going to fire him. But if Florida State goes 2-10, like that can't happen again. I look at people are going to want to talk about Brian Kelly and LSU. He's not going anywhere. That buyout's ridiculous. So when you're tied to these buyouts and you're trying to put money toward NIL and getting players, you're really putting these boosters and the people that pay that bill in a bind. I mean, there's only so much they can pay for. So I don't know. I mean, to answer your question, I don't think too many coaches are, maybe the Ryan Walters at Purdue, maybe somebody like that, where it's just been miserable and it's bottomed out. Maybe Mike Gundy gets pushed out at Oklahoma State. Those are a couple to watch for because they are in very much dead last.
There you have it from Bill Bender. We encourage you to check out Bill's work at the Sporting News. You see his X handle right there. You can follow him, of course, with everything that he does concerning college football and getting into college basketball, of course. Bill, we always appreciate the discussion. Of course, we'll have more clarity next week when we get together.
Hey, no problem. Thanks for having me on.